Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with my dear friend, Shaka Senghor. Shaka is one of Oprah's top 100 influencers and a dear friend of mine. He's been to my conferences Evolve in LA to share his wisdom. His book, Writing My Wrongs, is a profound book. I encourage everyone to read it. We're going to put the link up here after this talk. It will change your life. That's what it did to me. It profoundly shifted how I thought about childhood, the effects of childhood on a psychology, and then just understanding his experiences as a person of adversity growing up, and then as a Black man in America. So, welcome, Shaka. It's so happy. It's such a great thing to have you here with us, and my audience is so excited that you're going to be sharing your wisdom with us.
No, I'm really excited to be here as always. It's always a great joy to be in conversation with you. All the things that comes out of these conversations are really meaningful and impactful according to the people who get a chance to observe them. So excited to be here and share with your audience and let's just talk it through.
Let's do it. So, Shaka, tell us just intuitively and organically from your heart, what is your feeling about what's happening right now around you in America?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pivotal moment for America. I think we're going to determine if we're cowards or courageous. My optimism tends to lead toward courageous in the sense that you see so many people who have just become grown disgusted with the state of things in America, and they're challenging, they're pushing back on a government that seems to be tone deaf and indifferent to the suffering of people. Historically, these things have always popped up in small pockets, but this is the first time we're seeing a real national movement of the people in a meaningful way. So I'm confident that we'll come out on the other side of it. I believe we'll come out with a renewed sense of purpose and an idea of what we can become, and that we'll be able to lead the world a better place for the next generation.
Yeah, I'm sure you have seen many smaller moments like this burst, erupt, and then fade. And I'm sure you have felt like I have, disheartened, like people have a short term memory, nothing really sticks. And this may seem like one of those moments as well that may not stick, but I think this is how tidal waves crescent and they reach their peak and they reach their momentum. It takes many, many, many incremental moments that then lead to a crest. But then it may trough again, but the next crest, and we may not be here to see the next one, but it doesn't mean that these little steps don't have lasting impact. In psychology, as I work with people, they feel disheartened. They make a change and then they regress, right? And they feel like they're never going to turn that corner. And we're all wondering, is this the corner that America will turn and the white supremacy will topple? Is this that one? And we can't say for sure, but each momentum and each uprising, each inflection, I think makes a difference. Don't you think about that? Like,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's different now is the reframing of what white supremacy is. In the past, it's only been relegated to extreme hate groups. But in reality, when you're talking about implicit bias, when you're talking about white privilege, when you're talking about stereotyping and media, interpretation of a culture through a very negative lens, people are starting to see that it's all of these things that's brought us to this moment. And so I think we've already changed. I think people don't give credit to what's happening in the moment because we're trying to control the past or we're trying to predict the future that hasn't arrived. But we're changing right now in this moment. People are being challenged to see things that they had the privilege of ignoring, and they've been forced to sit. And I don't want to like not be honest about why this moment feels the way it feels. For months, we've been quarantined with stay-at-home orders, and so what it's done is it's forced white America to actually look at the things that we've been seeing and saying, "Hey, look at this thing over here." That they don't have the privilege to ignore any longer because they're not in the workspace, they're not socializing, they're not in their social clubs. So it forces us to look at the world different. And even people who are non-white, it's forced us to confront some things that we've ignored and to set a new standard for how we want to be as human beings. And I think that's not to be overlooked when we're talking about this moment.
Yeah, I mean, people, some people on the other side, feel that this is a what? Now we're dealing with this, like as if it's one more headache, after the virus, as if it's an impingement, and but we have to really realize that it's because of the virus and the pandemic, like you said, our sensitivities seem to have changed. We are not as distracted. We're more focused. We're not at graduation parties. We're not taking flights to the Bahamas. And precisely because of I think, turning inward that we were forced to do and already becoming uncomfortable with the lockdown, people had never sat with themselves ever. And now this is actually the perfect segue into a real external revolution. Something was turning inward and now it's showing up on the outside. And instead of begrudging that this is one more thing we have to deal with, we could also look at this as an amazing portal for real change to occur in society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the big thing, right? It's like people are forced. I mean, this is the first time that white America has ever dealt with disruption of their freedoms, their ability to move about the world uninfringed upon, unlike many other people who always feel like their freedom is being threatened and suffocated and in a lot of instances choked out, as we've seen. And so to be in a space where they can now at least have some relatability to what it feels like to not be able to move about the world freely. When the quarantines first kicked off, like there were widespread protests from white people here in California saying, "Look, we demand the right to go to the beach." There were armed protests at Michigan's Capitol saying that, "Hey, we demand to be able to go to Walmart and go about our daily lives, gardening and fraternizing with our friends." And so this level of disruption, I think, is good in a way, in the sense that it takes disruption to really create change. And that's the thing. Like most people are so resistant to anything that challenges them. And so now to add to that, these long overdue protests, I think it's the universe's way of saying, look, sit down, pay attention, and then act like you got some damn sense, basically. So
Yeah, this is not just happening, it's a perfect cause and effect of events. And like you said, when the privileged are forced to be disrupted and forced to think about their rights, it opens something up potentially. And I think this is the next level of understanding how other people's rights have never been a given, have never been taken for granted. And you're complaining about not being able to go to the beach for 2.5, 3 months. And there are a whole group of people who feel that they can't actually walk outside their homes in freedom for decades, for centuries. And when they can join those dots, they can have a greater empathy and sensitivity. But you're right, it takes that to create this, nothing out of nothing. And that's why I think this is potentially a marking point in history. And then there'll be more, and then we'll forget because it's human nature to go back to lull and complacency.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've always believed though, when the expansion is the right type of expansion, it's hard to shrink back into the normalcy of the way things used to be. And I think this is one of those moments, like the proactive stance that so many people and leaders are starting to take, like that offers a glimmer of hope. The big thing is we have to sustain it. We can't become emotionally frazzled and divided over things that are inanimate. So the media has shifted the focus to, oh my god, they're looting, and and not addressing the core issues, the causal things, as opposed to the effects. And as long as we stay centered in what the causes are and don't get distracted, because it's easy to point the finger at somebody and say, oh, well, they're looting, so this isn't that serious. But the reality is, you can't put property over people. And as long as we stay tuned into people, I think we'll eventually come out on the other side of this.
So property and then people, and then even beyond people, which is what you just alluded to, is the systemic problem. This is
Absolutely.
not about one looter. This is not about one police officer or even one black person. This is about a systematized, deeply entrenched way of being that is just in the air we breathe and has been for centuries. And it's uncomfortable to think of the great America in those terms. I agree, it makes people uncomfortable, so they rather talk about, but I'm not racist, I've never hurt or touched someone in malice of color. I'm good. It's not about one person. This is about a system, and all those people who have lighter to white skin benefit from that system, and it's okay to say I've benefited. It's nobody's fault. But in recognizing that privilege, we can then have the empathy for the other side of those who are not privileged. And it's so hard, I find, for people to open their hearts and understand it's not about them individually that we're talking about. We're talking about a white supremacist patriarchal system, and they are part of it. And you and I are part of it. I benefit from my eye color and my lighter skin. And we have to own that. And it's so difficult for people to just say, yeah, I benefit, I'm infected. I have to be infected because the infection is everywhere. But tell us, Shaka, as a young black man walking around Detroit, was it that you grew up?
Yeah, I originally grew up in Detroit. Yeah.
Were you, or when were you aware that the game is different, the rules are different for you?
Growing up, interesting enough, I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly white when we first moved there. We were actually the first black family on the block, and then as I got older, the block became a lot more diverse. But the way I was raised and the people I was raised around, we had incredible neighbors who, on one side of the neighbors were Italian, and we shared food with them, and we shared the fruits from our backyard trees. The lady on the other side was Irish, and so we just had people who actually cared about people. So it was different growing up. It wasn't until I got older and started moving about the world where I started realizing the narrative that my parents had given me, which was, we're all the same, etc. And I'm just recently understanding why my parents were so optimistic, because I was born only 4 years after Martin Luther King was murdered. And so they came out of that era. Like I was born, shortly after that his assassination, and I think they were just trying to find some optimism, in a sense of what does the world look like. But it was as I got older, I remember the first time I experienced police brutality. I was 14 years old, and I've had numerous physical encounters with officers throughout my teenage years and on until I went to prison, and largely because those systems act the same. But you I think the thing one of the things that always stuck out to me was when I was in elementary school and seeing white kids in my class who were praised in a way that didn't match up with their academic output, and it was elevated above mine, and I was far superior intellectually in those particular class settings, but the praise wasn't given out that way. And I mean, early on you start to wonder, like, why is it that I'm treated this way? And so those are the microaggressions, right? And I think what a lot of people aren't even recognizing, like in this moment, black society is not monolithic. We have a very different experiences throughout the black experience. Whether you grew up in an urban city, whether you grew up rural, whether you grew up down south, Midwest, New York, all of our experiences are very different. But what is similar and what binds us together are the microaggressions and how pervasive they are. When you go into the workplace and they create, standards of how do you wear your hair that does not acknowledge that you're different. When you live in a community that has wealth, and the assumption is that you're an entertainer or athlete, and those are the only things you can be, in order to be in this neighborhood. And so there's so many microaggressions that we just encounter in our day-to-day life. You walk into a store and nobody comes and says, "Hi, welcome." They're actually following you around the store. Or you go into a restaurant and a white couple comes in after you and they get seated first. And so there's just these layers and layers that is consistent across all of Black America, even though our data, our experiences are very different, but there's the microaggressions are consistent across every spectrum.
Yeah, and I so agree. And it's so hard to explain it to someone who hasn't experienced it because it's so energetically felt. It's emotionally picked up, you know. You notice their eyes leaving your face or glancing away, or you notice yourself being dismissed. And when I came to this country, I thought something's wrong with me. Like I was so welcomed in my country, but now I'm feeling like something, but maybe it's me. Maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe something's wrong with me. And it took me many years to understand this thing because I was not born and raised here, this thing called racism, even though there is different classism and colorism in my country too, of observed levels and depths. But this is also a different kind of microaggressions being put on you that you have to get used to, and you
Yeah,
have to understand, whoa, wow, oh, okay, I didn't get that. And people of a white skinned people don't ever have to experience that to a large degree. So it's very hard to explain this unique experience. It's very hard to communicate it. So people have to either just accept that this exists, because if you have to convince someone, that's kind of a battle lost already. You know, people have to be open enough, and I think this moment in time is challenging white people to open up to that experience, that there's a whole reality that they haven't considered until this point
yeah,
in time.
yeah. And I mean, what I found is in conversations, whenever we're talking about race in America, um, America's just a lazy country when it comes to like having tough conversations. And it's always interesting when we start talking about systemic racism and the white people who are most vocal about not being racist, and they shut down. And what I always say to them is, imagine what it feels like to be Black and you have all these microaggressions because people are making assumptions about you that aren't true based solely on your skin color. And that connection, that ability for them to feel in that moment what it's like to be labeled a racist or say you're racially biased, and they will fight you on not having privilege and not being racially biased and not seeing color, which is like ridiculous. But then when you explain to them like this is what microaggressions does, so the thing is these are tough but important conversations, and we're in a space now to where we just can't allow the conversation to shrink back into silence. Like
Yep.
we got to talk about it until we're no longer uncomfortable.
Yep, yep, and push back. And the way I talk to women, especially, is I tell them what, you have lived, I tell the women, you have lived in a world where you say that men have overridden your civil rights. And you want men to pay attention to you, don't you? And you want men to come on your team, don't you? And you will not say that sexism is a thing in your head. You want to be acknowledged, you want to be heard. Well, racism, same thing, and why is it so difficult? But like you said, it's tough to feel uncomfortable and understand that you are part of a problem. People feel like it's a personal attack. Actually, the admission is probably the most courageous thing one can do, is to say I'm part of the problem. But
Right.
I find this in parenting too. Parents are so defensive, and they're like, I love my kid, I love my kid, and they can't do the yes and you are unconscious right now. But Shaka, when you came to Evolve, what really opened my eyes was when you talked about the prison industrial complex, and now I call it for my work the parenting industrial complex,
Yeah.
because it's a system, right? All these systems,
Yeah.
and I'm a little bit maybe impassioned here, so just don't mind me. But I so see, and you've alluded to it, and I want to get your take on it, that it's just a continuation of modern day slavery. It's just a new version, of let's clean up the streets by creating laws that are really only going to apply to young black men, and let's clear them up. Let's clear families of black men and black fathers and just puncture them at the core. We've seen so many videos lately of white people being stopped by police and let off, and
Yeah.
the same thing the black man would be incarcerated. But we don't understand what that's doing to families, to young children whose parents are being locked up for crimes that their white counterparts would not endure. So, what psychology, right? What a psychology that creates in families, and what a way to puncture it, because now it's legal and illegal, and you hide behind laws. So, talk about this, and please help us understand this.
Yeah, I mean, even in the current situation, the way that the officer was charged was very different from what the Black experience is. So the prosecutor started with a lower charge of third degree homicide. If that would have been a Black man, they would have started at the highest degree, which would have been first degree homicide, and allowed them to plead down, right? So just the application of the laws are very unbalanced. You know, the crack cocaine disparities versus powder cocaine, the proximity in terms of how many stops are made against Black people when it comes to patrolling their communities in their in neighborhoods. And so all of this is rooted in the 13th Amendment. You know, when you go back and you read the 13th Amendment, it says no one should be subject to involuntary servitude except those unduly convicted of a crime. And so when you're talking about free labor, cheap labor, you know, this is what prison has become. And similar to the problems we've had in policing, like those problems exist like 10 times worse in prisons, like the lack of transparency. We have over 2 million men and women incarcerated at any given point, and yet, as a society, we don't know much about what happens in prison. Fortunately, there's been myself and many other credible witnesses to come out to articulate that. But for the most part, it's a very clandestine environment. It's a very clandestine system. And people don't even know that there are people in there working for 10 cents an hour, 13 cents an hour. Being their physical labor is being exploited for big corporations and companies. And there's many of these companies who have benefited from free.
Yeah, tell us about the companies, and because
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think the average citizen doesn't realize how we are participating in this system by
yeah, it's,
endorsing these
yeah,
companies.
there was a whole list circulating, and somehow it magically disappeared. But it included Whole Foods and Victoria's Secret and other corporations who was using prison labor, and then they wouldn't hire these men and women when they got out of prison, which is problematic. So it's problematic that they're exploiting this cheap labor, but then it's, you know, what's even more problematic is these people cannot get hired when they come home from these same companies that hired them in prison. So, you know, it's a big issue that we're not thinking about, and all these things intersect. You know, we're talking about the anger and the frustration. You know, it's not many Black people who have been in a courtroom and haven't felt the weight of injustice as administered to a loved one. And then you see these police where there's all the evidence in the world, like literally very clear camera evidence, and then there's hesitancy to charge them when we can just get picked up on somebody just saying something happened. And I mean, we saw that with Amy Cooper in Central Park when she's like, "Hey, a Black man is here, he's threatening me." Like that's an immediate reaction and response. Typically, that doesn't end well for Black people, and so you know, all these things are interchangeable and they intersect in a real way.
So, Shaka, even today, even before this latest wave, when you were walking on the street, are you aware of people's reaction to you for the most part?
I am always conscious. Like I'm a fairly successful Black man at this point. You know, I drive a nice car. I live in a nice neighborhood, and I just the other day, literally going out to get my mail. You know, I see a couple of my white neighbors, you know, or people I assume are from the neighborhood, walking, you know, past, and my mind immediately goes to what if they assume that I'm burglarizing this house as opposed to living in it because they don't know me. And if they make that call, the police is for sure going to be at my door within 2 minutes. You know, whenever I'm driving and there's, you know, a police car pulls up anywhere in my vicinity, I'm like, okay, now I got to go through the checklist. Do I got my license? Do I got my registration? Do I got my thing? And so it's a level of anxiety that we're constantly, you know, dealing with. And it's so interesting. I went to Ghana last December, and on the flight back, I was flying a first class flight, and there was another Black man on the first class flight. And when we got off the plane, and just to give some context, in Ghana, I felt so welcome, so loved, like my Blackness was a gift. It was Black police, Black, you know, president, like it's a Black country. And it's beautiful to be in a space where you know the moment you step in that space, you're welcome and people are greeting you, not as if you're an enemy, but on the flight back when we got off. As soon as we got off the plane, there were 3 or 4 ICE officers and they're barking these orders, give us your passport, blah, blah. And the black man who was on the plane with me and he's getting on, and we were the first ones off the plane. We're like in first class. And he's like, is this normal protocol? And this officer is just talking to him in such a degrading, dehumanizing, maybe if you travel more, you would know this is our policies, etc. And it hit me, this is America, where you can be a successful black man getting out of a first class flight, and then you have some officer who may barely have any education attacking you without knowing you, just solely based on your color, and treat you as if you're unwelcome in a country where your tax dollars are paying for his employment. And it was just disgusting to witness. And it really made me ashamed of the things that, are happening in our country in a real way. Like my grandfather was a military veteran. My father's a military veteran. Many of my friends are military veterans in law enforcement. And I think about the way that they've served, the sacrifices they've made for a country that does not welcome us based on our skin and based on a perception that they have of us that has nothing to do with us, And
Yeah.
so this is a moment where, they're being forced to confront who they actually are.
Yeah, and it's hard to look in the mirror. So just tying everything you just said, uh, if people understood that your daily experience as a black man is to live in anxiety because the chances you will be misunderstood are very high. And
Absolutely.
to walk around like that, constantly on guard, where the police is not seen as someone who will protect you and most likely will find fault in you. And then that feeds into this prison industrial complex, which for me is a way to erase black men, especially off the streets, and continue a different kind of incarceration. And then when you're in the prison, the labor being used in such a way to again benefit the white patriarchy and these companies who then when you leave do not support you, and now you know better than anyone because Shaka does so much work on when they leave the prison, and how to help these young black men and women or all these people of color leaving the prison to get back on their feet, how hard it is. And these same companies that benefit are now not helping. So where do these people go, and how do they, uplift themselves again? And then that's the cycle, you see, and then that's how it just continues. And then just to this last point you made, how much more does a person of color and a black person have to do to prove their worth? It's not enough you're first class and you're successful in your country. We have to work 100 times more, even with me in very small ways compared to anyone else's experience, really. But people will say, wow, you speak such good English, they're surprised that I can speak English and
Right.
communicate, or like, wow, you didn't have tigers on your streets growing up. And I was like, wow, this level of education is so low, but that's okay. I don't expect everyone to know about India. But it's the presumptions that go with it. You're wild, you're feral, you're untamed, you're not sophisticated. Those are the things that matter. It's okay if you think tigers are roaming around on the street. It's what you do with that as a story about what that means as my character. So all of it is this vicious cycle, and so tell us, Shaka, what would you, if you could write the next rights, what would you say should be the next steps for us?
Yeah, no, I think the next steps is to really put into practice what we're actually learning right now. I'm seeing a lot of companies are posting, Black Lives Matter. The NFL president is being apologetic about getting it wrong with the players. You're seeing this outpouring of support from white protesters, and the thing is like sustained practice of this kind of behavior. It can't be a quick PR campaign or a publicity stunt that doesn't lead to any direct action. So for me, it's incorporating these things we're learning into hiring practices, into educational practices, into dismantling the criminal justice system as it currently exists, and not solely relying on this old political machine that's super divisive and that leaves us with limited options in terms of leadership. So I think creating space for leaders to emerge more organically in their communities and in their localities, I think that's the step in the right direction.
And economic empowerment. I loved Marianne Williamson's campaign because, as far as I could see, she was the only one I've seen who boldly and unabashedly put reparations on the top of her platform. And she
Yeah,
did not budge from it. And it was more powerful because she is a white woman. But it has to come from that side. And I don't mean that they're two dividing sides, but we women need men to understand their aggressions toward us. It's the white person who needs to stand up and say, hey, I've benefited so much. Let me repair. And the only way to repair is not through mere apology or even from shaking the hands of 10 Black people every day. It's really to change their status economically. At the end of the day, economic empowerment and then reparations has to be part of the vocabulary. And I see these politicians, Obama included, and perhaps because he didn't want to push it because he'd already, he's Black and he's like, but we can't be afraid to talk about reparations. We can't be
absolutely.
afraid. If you take a loan from someone, you have to pay back. And
Yeah,
why are we so afraid to pay back? Look how people are so up in arms about looting some stupid sneaker store. Not to condone it, but we also know a lot of looting was done by white people, okay? But not to condone it. I'm just saying, you're up in arms about sneakers stolen. What about 400 years of psychology, security, stability, Black fathers stolen? What about that reparation? And why are we afraid to keep it in the forefront? Biden, Trump, I mean, Trump, sorry I said that,
yeah.
but Biden or the next candidates need to put reparations always up in center. I mean, that's how we show that we are giving back for all the free stuff we got for all these years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most important conversations when you think about our criminal justice system. Everybody's in there to pay their debt to society, right? Even though America owes one of the biggest debts to its Black members of society. I never expect politicians to have courage because I've just been proven over and over they'll only do what gets them voted into office. They're not willing to be experimental. They're not willing to be courageous on these issues when it just doesn't align with their ability to get voted into office. And so until we have courage in office, like we'll always be fighting that battle. So I think it has to happen locally. I think it has to happen institutionally as far as businesses and corporations who benefited from free and cheap labor. But I just don't have any high hopes for any politician to be courageous enough on the
Right,
issue.
but we should, if as we wake up and we don't hear reparations as part of their vocabulary, as part of their jargon, we need to say, right? We say if there isn't clean water, we're like, where's the clean water? Why aren't you fighting for my clean water? So we need to say, hey, where's reparations? Well,
Yep.
I want to see where you stand on reparations. So both, you're right. We can't ask them to do anything. You're absolutely right. Again, it's only us, the
Well,
common
we
citizen.
can ask them. We just can't have high hopes and expectations that they'll do it. But
Correct, correct.
we
Unless
should not
we,
even just ask them. We should demand that of our politicians
correct.
to support our real interests. Me, I'm just not optimistic that they'll do it, but I think it's important that we demand it.
And at this point, we're not even demanding it. We're not even asking. It's not clean water. We're not, but it is clean water. You know what I'm saying? It's at that level of the air we breathe. And if we don't understand that, then the rift in this country will continue. So we have to treat it like clean air, and we have to clean the air. We have to clean the air up. And the way to clean the air is to create real reparation, real repair, and then we can all breathe. We're all not breathing, right? So to symbolically riff off what the latest, what George Floyd went through, we all can't breathe, and until we all feel that the air is polluted and contaminated and toxic, it won't change, right? So it's really about all of us doing the work now, and that's what you're working on. Tell us about your the work you do, how we can support the work you do, and if we donate to your company and your charity, your nonprofit, where does it go? And how do you envision the next steps for, a person like me or a lay person just wanting to spend their money? Where should we spend our money? How can we
Yeah.
support this?
So in less than 2 weeks, I will be celebrating my 10th year of freedom. And I've been thinking about what does the next phase of my life look like. And the next phase of my life looks like focusing more on, the strategic part of my work plan and creative stuff. But I co-created with some incredibly amazing people, Redeem Soul, and that's redeem. And then the word soul is SOLE, because I think in order to have empathy and compassion, you have to walk in somebody else's shoes. And basically, what it is a platform that aggregates these organizations who are doing incredible criminal justice work in a variety of ways. So there's Prison Creative Arts Project, and they utilize arts to help men and women, imagine a new life for themselves. There's Ladies of Hope that provides housing for women coming out of incarceration. There's Anti-Recidivism Coalition that helps men and women return back to society healthy and whole. So when you go to the site, you'll see all these incredible organizations and a donate button that you can donate directly to the organizations. All these are nonprofit organizations, with the exception of Redeem Soul. We're the host and we're the facilitator of connecting people to all these incredible resources, highlighting the news in these spaces and the stories in these spaces so that people will understand like it's not just one person who's calling for criminal justice reform. There's legions of us who are doing incredible work, and I wanted to put all that in one space so that people can actually support. So if you go to redeemsoul.com, you'll find all these incredible organizations, and not only just to donate, but also to learn and to share. And there's ways that you can plug in. So that's
Yeah,
pretty
we
much what that
posted it. We
is.
posted it in the chat. It's pinned to the top.
Thank you.
So Shaka, you have a new book coming out. When is it going to be out?
We still haven't landed on a date with COVID, with the current COVID pandemic. We're not sure, but I'll be done with it before the end of the year. And I'm super excited that you asked about that. I just made a Medium post called "Stop Resisting," a letter to my son, and it's the story of what it's like to be a father during these times and have that conversation with my son about what's going on in the world. And so even though it's directed toward my son, it's literally to the sons of society, which is the name of the book. Letters to Letter to the Sons of Society.
I love it. I love it. Okay, Shaka, thank you so much. I know I will be meeting you in these conversations again and again in the future because
Absolutely.
I love what you do and really admire what you stand for and how you have helped evolve all of us. So I thank you for the work you do.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Bye, Shaka.
All right, talk soon.